today is Andy Soper. Andy comes to us from Grand Rapids, where he founded the Manasseh Project, and as your program says, launched the first shelter for trafficked youth. And we look forward to hearing from him and how he's attempted to mobilize people and respond to these very real issues in very much on the ground way. So it's exciting that we started there. So please welcome. Oh, I really have to. For participating with us today. So thank you very much. And please give a welcome to Andy Soper.
Well, I got up really early this morning, not because Grand Rapids is super far away from here, but because I am chronically behind on remembering to grab things. So I had to drive half an hour the other direction before I came here. Let me make sure this whole queue is on at some point, because being chained to this is going to be painful for you, not so much for me. Start to wrap. Here's what I want to kind of address today. Human trafficking in and of itself is a symptom of a lot of other things that are going on. So focusing on trafficking is a bit like focusing on one specific ailment when the system has HIV or AIDS. It is not that the cancer may ultimately kill you, but it is something else that is causing the cancer to exist, if that makes sense. So with that in mind, I want to encourage you to think through this practically, not in a hyperbolic manner. Anybody who's telling you that every child is at high risk to be trafficked is lying to you and wants your money. Anybody who tells you that you are incapable or incapable of making major changes in your life, and there are very simple steps that won't cost you anything to change the world, is lying to you, because justice is incredibly impractical. For injustice to continue, you have to do nothing. It just keeps going. So to assume that your life will not be flipped on its head to pursue justice seems irrational to me. So as we start to think about today, I'm going to try to set up what trafficking looks like in Michigan. I want you to understand that to engage it is not simply an awareness issue or simply making subtle changes in your life. Those subtle changes will quickly add up and complicate your life. If you don't believe me, ask my children, where all of a sudden it complicated my life to such a point that I was working far too much because it just kind of blew my mind. If nothing else, my children can tell you how much our life changed when justice began to matter. It complicates things. Since we're at Spring Arbor, if you look at the biblical story, justice complicates things. As does injustice for, I would say, people who believe in the biblical narrative. There's a very interesting story in the Old Testament where Solomon dies and the next king comes along and he says, if you think Solomon was bad, wait until they get a load of me. Well, technically, the next step is he begins to enslave and force labor upon people, followed quickly by exile. As an American church, if we are ignoring and playing our part in enslaving other people, I'm not quite sure why we expect something different. So that's where I'm going to begin. That's not a threat, it's just kind of how I think about it. So let's look at it this way. We're going to move quickly because we got 45 minutes and you want to know. This is from 2009. This is a rough breakdown, estimate, of how human trafficking looks in the United States drug world. We tend to talk about sex trafficking more often than we talk about labor trafficking. Why? Because it's sexier to talk about, for the most part. The complication with that is when we're focusing on sex trafficking to like an immense degree, we miss the larger part of it, and we kind of absolve ourselves of a reality that we're a part of it. For instance, how many of you bought sex this week? Paid for a sex act? I'll take pornography out of it, and some of you can breathe. How many of you paid for chocolate or coffee, or used a cell phone, or have a hearing aid, or flew on a plane, or drove a car? All of these things have connections in their supply chain to slavery worldwide. And so by focusing just on sex trafficking, we relieve ourselves of our obligation to the other majority of trafficking that exists in the United States and around the world. So we're going to break down trafficking in Michigan and look at both halves of it. Halves, loosely, closely halves of it. Where it can happen, because we have not, as a state, done a great job at looking at data collection around human trafficking. What are the factors that are driving it? What are the arenas in which both exist, and how you can start to think about it? A lot of the work that I've done over the past few years, we opened the shelter, but that was an aspect of what we did through the Manasseh Project in Grand Rapids. A big and important one, but other parts were training professionals, and other parts were helping human trafficking task force to think through their own county and region. What were the major signs of trafficking in their region? And most people come to this trafficking field through sex trafficking because there's a movie about it. If they had kidnapped that girl in France in the movie Taken and said, now you're going to wash dishes, nobody goes to that movie. But that's more common. So we're going to think through these two halves and try to understand our own state just a bit. So let's talk about the TBPA. I'm going to assume a baseline knowledge of trafficking so we can move along. But this is how we define sex trafficking. I'm going to start with sex trafficking and move to labor today. Human public transportation provision of any other person for the purpose of the Commercial Sex Act, in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which a person forced to perform such an act is under the age of 18. A lot of jargon. What's important is a commercial sex act induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or if that person is a minor. We're going to talk a little bit later about how that is effective in our state, and how you should not necessarily believe the headlines that say Michigan now leads the country in human trafficking legislation. It does not. We'll get to that in just a hot second. So this is how our federal legislation defines human trafficking. If you're an adult, you have to be able to prove force, fraud, or coercion was used against you to prosecute a trafficker. If you're a minor, by federal legislation, you are a victim. Not you are presumed a victim, you are a victim. I'll make good use of that distinction a little bit. I'm so used to doing these in smaller groups, I won't ask if there were any questions about that, but I'm not going to. So let's just take a minute to think through what are the arenas for sexual exploitation. So wherever you're from, I want you to think about your own area in these ways. Residential brothels will be a little bit more tricky for you to identify, and if you can't identify them, you should probably work for Homeland Security. So a residential brothel is exactly as it sounds. It is a brothel operating out of a residential area. So think where they're finding them near Chicago, Atlanta, even in Grand Rapids. They are in just a regular suburban neighborhood. Next door neighbors are like, my kids rode their bikes in their driveway. They have a garden. What was going on there? And it's largely Hispanic gangs are very good. They've perfected this model. We're thinking about people who have perfected business models. So they'll promise money, marriage, education, job to somebody that wants to get to America for opportunity. They get here and they are forced to work in a brothel. Women, children, whatever. And they're held inside and men are recruited from transit male population. A lot of that is targeting Spanish-speaking populations, so they hand out business cards as an invitation to come to the brothel. I know this exists in GR. We worked one case where it was adults that they were bringing them in as older. It wasn't trafficking necessarily, it couldn't be charged that way anyway. Stripping is more like the weed of the commercial sex industry. This is a gateway drug. If you want to understand how stripping can be sexual exploitation, you have to know a strip club promoter, where they systematically kind of break down women who dance and remove their confidence, make them think that they can't make good choices, charge them to dance at a strip club, all that sort of thing. Escort services, whether they're online in their LLCs, or this is a back page Craigslist type thing, or I guess if we're talking about Michigan, Backpage, Craigslist, Naughty Reviews, My Companion. There's 15 different websites you can go to if you're looking for online escort services. That's not an encouragement for you to do, but it's just the reality. When I say prostitution, we're talking about street level prostitution. Flippantly we would call them streetwalkers or prostitutes or whatever, any way we can degrade them and not make them one of our own. Massage parlors, we are not talking about the place to cut your hair and give you a massage. It's not like Panopolis Salon is not a massage parlor. These are places where you can actually go and sex act isn't necessarily expected, but it can be asked for extra money. You can also find these online. And pornography being the last one, I get a lot of requests to come and talk to men's groups about pornography, and for the most part, I'm like, I don't really want to. Just stop looking at it. Knucklehead is not an addiction. Sex addiction is not a real thing. As the American Psychological Association, it is a behavior, and yes, it changes your brain patterns. It is not an addiction. Pornography gets tricky when we're talking about sexual exploitation, and that, according to the International Labor Organization, there is both forced and child labor in pornography. Countries like Russia and the United States are chief in the promotion and creation of it, because everybody in this room has a camera on their cell phone. Is the biggest reason. Make sense? So think about your neighborhood, your city. Where are these things operating? It might be online, chances are they are. But this is one aspect of it. The commercial sex industry is one aspect of things that are driving sexual exploitation of youth or adults. There's some other things, because there isn't great data collection done in this area. 2 years ago, the Mass Project tried to get a beat on what it actually looks like. So we went around to every county we could possibly get our hands on, any information that was online, made a lot of phone calls in which our interns were hung up on for demanding that they should count their runaway population. And we looked at these 4 different categories. Runaway being runaway youth, the #1 entryway into commercial sex in America. Previous sexual abuse, so we were looking at either confirmed cases of child sexual abuse, and even looked at some of the ones that people were implicated in but not prosecuted. And poverty was another one that we looked at, how many people are living below the poverty line. We tend to tell this story more often than not in media that the average sex trafficking victim is an upper middle class white girl from the burbs. And that happens, and I'm not trying to qualify somehow which way it's worse, that's not the point. But it happens 25, maybe 30% of the time. The majority of trafficking victims are children of color that come from a background of poverty. That story doesn't get told well, and it doesn't get told often enough. And so we start to think that Facebook is the main tool for recruiting. It's not. It is a tool, it is a big tool, and it's an easy tool to use, but neighborhood pimping is just as easy. You actually have access to that person, you know their family, all that sort of thing. Online exploitation is real, but pimping is anything that's highly relational. You kind of got to know somebody. And the last one we looked at was substance abuse. And this is arrest for illicit drugs, meth labs, drug courts, that sort of thing. So looking at substance abuse as a whole. After reviewing all these things and saying these are some of the main drivers, in addition to the commercial sex industry, we started to kind of categorize what are the biggest risk counties in Michigan for sexual exploitation of children, commercial sexual exploitation. Here's what we came up with. Here's your top 15. Wayne, Genesee, Kalamazoo, England, Berrien, Muskegon, Saginaw, Oakland, Macomb, Kent, Lake, Roscommon, Sheboygan, Hillsdale, and Branch. Some of those you were like, oh, well, the murder capitals of America are Detroit and Flint, so it makes sense. Flint's in Genesee County, Detroit's in Wayne. But the rest of these break down. Some of them are kind of major areas. Kalamazoo's a little bit bigger of a town. Kent has Grand Rapids, one of the bigger cities, but a lower poverty rate than Kent. What you see is that the higher ones up there have a higher poverty rate. That is a very big driver of commercial sex in Michigan. Some of the more interesting ones that we found were Lake and Roscommon. Can you tell me a picture? These Okay, tourism may be an opportunity there, but these are not like bustling metropolis. So I bring this up just to acknowledge the fact that this is not only an urban issue. In as much as poverty in the city drives this, poverty in the country drives it as well. We work with more than one victim that does not come from a big city. They were being trafficked by their parents, they were being trafficked by a boyfriend, whatever, in a country where somehow it's supposed to be unlikely. And it is more unlikely than when you have a highly concentrated population. However, poverty exists in spades in a lot of rural areas. And that is maybe the biggest connector for all victims is not race, perhaps is not, it's more poverty. Though, again, children of color are much more likely to be exploited. So if we're looking at these different counties, I apologize for this map. I hated it the second I used it. I took the UP off because nothing bad happened. Some underage drinking, good-natured bottle slinging. Let's talk about some of the bigger ones that exist. Genesee, Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne, all right here. What are some of the things they have in common? Well, they're next to an international border. They're closer to Ohio, but nothing that comes out of Ohio. These are major. And you also have blight. You have large companies ruining the community. And this is not me trying to be political. It's just a reality. Go to Flint and look around. Large companies, when they collapse, it lands on the community. So you've got that going on. Ingham makes sense when we're talking about transient male populations, Convention Town, Kent County, as well as Grand Rapids. You know exactly where 94 runs through, you know where 96 runs through. And so most of them are attached to places where we're highly traveled. We've got convention towns, we've got high levels of poverty. Berrien County is the closest thing we've got to Chicago. And up above, we're looking at Kent and Muskegon there. There's a couple things we'll bring up when we're talking about labor trafficking there. Muskegon is a highly depressed area. Highly depressed area. A lot of young women that we work with are from Muskegon. It is not their fault that this is going on, but there is another element to this that we need to mention. This is organized crime. Most of the young women we work with out of Muskegon are worked by pimps from Chicago. So they are run back and forth on this little pipeline, depending on the week, depending on the weekend, what's going on. In the summertime, they're more likely to be in Muskegon. Why? Because North Shores is right there, and you've got a lot of wealth in Ottawa County right along the lake there. So there's an opportunity because upper middle class white men are the dominant buyers of sex, and you got a lot of it in Ottawa County. And Kent County. Let's not take that out of the equation. So all of these types of things, it's more than just some of the factors we talked about. And I want to kind of push these off a little bit and talk about labor trafficking so we can get a better idea of how that's happening. I'm going to focus on two of the several that were available in Michigan. When I talk about domestic servitude, I'm not only talking about having a maid or a nanny or a gardener. I'm also talking about hotel service, nail salons, that sort of thing, which is the second biggest in America, domestic servitude. And the other one is agriculture. And I want to go back to our map and think through these, and I added the UP back in because when we're talking about tourism, no place is more happy than the UP. So as we're thinking about, let's start with domestic servitude. This is a bit more tricky and that is normally in-house. Or it is people that we look past on purpose. The maid in the hallway at the hotel, the gardener, the groundskeeper, all that we look past these people. And yet, by the way, they know almost everything about us. They know us by demographic, how clean our room is going to be, what the internet porn bill is going to be from when you're in that hotel. They know all of that information, but we look right past them. So they're easy to look past. Domestic servitude is an easy thing to miss. So when we're working with different task forces, we're talking about what type of trafficking is predominant. I want you to think about major industries just for a minute. Not just major industries, but major industries that have a big need of technology or engineering. to where we're importing talent from other countries. This is one way that it happens. Where someone will show up and they got a job, and I'll name off a bunch of companies, and this is not me saying these are like trafficking companies. Giving examples, Herman Miller, Steelcase, Dow Chemical, where there's a great international talent being brought in, and that's awesome, and I have zero problem with it. But when we were talking about this with some of the different task forces, and that always sex trafficking, we need to end sex trafficking, and yet they know quite a few people who said, oh yeah, so-and-so came from, they moved here from Hong Kong, and they work for such and such a company, and their cousin takes care of their kids. I'm like, oh, okay. Is their cousin, do they speak English? No. Is the family? Yeah. Okay, so everybody in the family, except the cousin, who is also from Hong Kong, speaks English. Yep. Did she go to parties with him? No. Where do you see her? Well, I don't know when the last time I saw her was. That's one area in which, in people who come from a specific culture wherein it is not strange to have an indentured servant. I'm not saying Hong Kong is that place, that's one example. This just kind of is a normative practice. It might not be in the States, but in cultures that are coming in, it may be a normative practice that wouldn't be thought twice. So thinking about it in that way. As we expand that out and think about some other opportunities where foreign-born victims or foreign-born people are brought to the United States and exploited, let's talk just a minute about how that can happen. I mean, we talk a lot about hair braiding and nail salons and that sort of thing, where these are environments where we can have labor trafficking, and this is true. I want to take this just a minute to talk about a little bit of a difference here when we talk about child labor and the worst forms of child labor. How many of you had a job before you were 16? Were you trafficked? No. When I was 11, my dad was a laborer for a construction company, went out on his own. And that summer, I loved to block for my dad almost every day. At 11. When my mom was a kid, her parents had a restaurant, the Night Owl, little restaurant in Monmouth, Michigan, right there, on the red. My mom got up with my grandmother in the morning. They went in. She worked the breakfast shift. She went to school. She came back and helped at lunch. She went back after school, did her homework, and then closed a couple times a week. My mom was not a trafficking victim. This is a family business. Every kid who grew up on a farm would be a trafficking victim if that was the case, right? So I want you to think about the worst form of child labor, where a child is denied education, health, any kind of community opportunity or social opportunity, or is a victim of abuse or neglect. That is the worst form of child labor. That is what we're talking about in the chocolate and coffee industry. We are not talking about kids that just live with their parents. Now, that being said, in the instances in Michigan where we have a bust, and we call it undocumented workers working in Chinese restaurants. I use that one because it's happened a few times in the past few years. In some of those cases, it was a legal labor issue or an immigration issue. Someone was here, undocumented, was caught, and exported. Or deported. Exported. It makes sense if we're talking about trafficking. That's a smuggling issue, not a trafficking. In other cases, the people that are working there show up the entire shift to work in the same van with the kids. Early in the morning, the kids don't leave, the staff don't leave until the end of the night when the bus leaves to go home. And these are big Chinese cafes, and some of the better Mexican restaurants in town. Those are signs that we start to look for. How are you being transported? Are you staying together? All those sorts of things. Make sense? So I want you to consider your community. Who lives there? Are you from an affluent community? What is more likely to be your traffic of choice in your community from an affluent neighborhood? And I'm not going to give you that answer. I mean, you just have to take a look at your map, take a look at where you travel. So when we're talking about summertime, we have a lot of tourism, Grand Traverse, trying to look for the one my parents live in, they live in Keynote. Worst place. Anyway, I'm not going to dish on Gaelic. Otsego. So important that you want to learn about. So, all these areas are spots where, I'm not saying that everybody who is there working and they are from a different country are being trafficked. It's simply not the case. You can get a work visa, you can come over. But as we transfer to start thinking about agricultural work, I want to explore that just a little bit to let you know how this works in kind of a pyramid scheme. And I say that coming from Kingstown, where we have animals. I know what a pyramid scheme is. Well, yeah, good people. They were here from Amway because they funded it. As we start to think about agricultural work, Michigan is a destination port for agriculture workers. Right now, apples being a big deal. In the summer, you've got blueberries, all sorts of different opportunities. Now, there are farms. There was an NPR report not too long ago of some cherry and apple farms up in Traverse City where it's the same farmer working with the same labor force for years. The dads work together, their children work together, and it was a pretty healthy relationship. There were some signs of like, that made me a little bit uncomfortable, like, well, that's always how it's been. I'm like, well, I have a problem with that, but outside of that, there can be some really healthy relationships. As you're looking around, it is not terribly difficult to find out how many migrant workers you have in your community. Working with, I know later today there's some farm law and migrant law work for the next keynote. Great. I happen to live in Kent County, which is next to Ottawa County, which is there are more migrant workers in Ottawa County than any other county in Michigan, 13,000. I was speaking with the chief of police, Jack Dykstra, last Saturday. One of the things they're running into is the farmer will say, well, I pay a fair wage, and the farmer is not lying. He pays it to the foreman of that crew. The foreman then says, I pay for your gas, I pay for your food, I pay for this, I pay for that, so you make $1.50 an hour. And that can be an American foreman, that can be a foreman from another country. It doesn't quite matter, but because we lose that track, it just sort of falls off the end, and we assume that everybody's getting paid well. That is not necessarily the case. If you are a woman, you are at much higher risk, not just to be exploited through labor, but also through sex. Especially if you don't speak the language, that sort of thing. Be aware of the vulnerability factors for women in this industry. If you are being forced to work, you can't escape that situation. Chances of you being able to accurately report what's going on to you, and when I say accurately, meaning probably won't be hurt by the other side, or having opportunity to report what's happening to you is slim, specifically if you have immigration issues and you're nervous about that sort of interaction in the first place. So take a look at where you go in the summertime. Take a look at where you go in the winter. So as we're looking up at the UP, I lived for the majority of my life either right around Barker County or right next to Keynote, where we know how to play hockey. So we had snowmobiles all winter long. It was odd whenever it turned to hunting and snowmobile season. There were all of a sudden bars that were kind of out in the sticks a little bit that started having amateur stripper night. They don't do it all summer long. They don't do it in the spring. As soon as you get men coming out to hunt, fish, camp, or snowmobile, all of a sudden we need amateur strippers that night. Because it's an opportunity for both the bar and women to make money, and it is an economically depressed area. Other thing I want to highlight when we're talking about tourism, I grew up in Keynote Bay, Indian community, and we have 3 casinos within an hour and a half that are connected to the Ojibwe tribe. My cousin is connected with the tribe, and she runs special education. And we got a call from her at the beginning of May saying, what am I supposed to do when kids are coming party and gamble and win and drink and all that sort of thing. It's a festive environment, or at least it's supposed to be. That's why they pump oxygen into the room to make it feel high. So the opportunities for people to be exploited in that environment, both through labor and sex, are quite high. I give you this information so as you're planning a trip, and I know you already know signs to look for. If you're going to an area that is a pretty normal touristy area in Michigan, these are signs that you look for. If you are a farmer in town, how do you actually promote good labor practices within the state? Most big farms in Michigan are not looked at for their labor practices. It's not. So while some are and some do a great job, there are opportunities to reach out to migrant communities. Their kids can get education, all that sort of thing. A very good friend of mine in Grand Rapids, that's kind of how she engages the trafficking issue in general. Her and her husband engage with kids that are from migrant families that are working through school and making sure that their parents may or may not have documentation being in the United States are protected from a boss who will exploit them. Just because someone is breaking the laws of the country does not mean that the punishment is abuse. So just put that in there. It's not a political comment. In about 9 minutes left, so we can move quickly. This is where human trafficking is happening, and we're all live. In Michigan, any one of these things can be attached to slave labor in the supply chain. So, did a slave put together your Hershey bar? Probably not. Probably made in Pennsylvania. However, where did that come from? For some of the others, I mean, I'm more and more convinced that this is not something new, and we know what to do about it. So either we lack the will and respect for people who are being injured, or we lack the knowledge to actually know how to engage, but in a similar way that I would say, I don't want to talk about pornography so much because the answer is so daggone simple in terms of just viewing it. And there's a bunch of other cultural things we need to talk about that way. Don't buy it. Your life will get complicated in a big daggone hurry. If you have to start to research and look up and find out what can I buy, man, does your life get complicated. It's supposed to be complicated if the world is unjust. Two quick thoughts on that, and they're both from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. One, any call from Christ is a call to die. That is not a terribly uncomplicated thing. The second one is we need to drive a spoke into the wheel that crushes. If we know that people are being crushed by a wheel of exploitation and oppression, and it is not our job to just bandage those who are being crushed, we need to break the wheel. Talk to Nike in the 1990s when it came out that women were beaten to death with Nike shoes in camps because they sewed the seam wrong. They were forced to run in 100-degree plus weather to motivate them. And they were passing out. They weren't like their places they were sleeping weren't just places where like a dorm here, which I assume they were barracks. And they were stacked on top of one another. And when Michael Jordan comes out and says, "You can't use my image anymore," Nike had a problem and lost millions of dollars over years, so we're pushing that over money at billions. They have made drastic changes. Are they where they want to be or where we want them to be? Not quite yet. Drastic changes. You want to change a corporation, you need to hit it in the wallet. It does not have a heart because they are not people. So you need to hit a corporation in the wallet if you want to see that kind of change happen. It's just the reality. And you do that not just by what you consume, but by consuming less. You cannot solve human trafficking, which fundamentally, specifically labor trafficking, is a consumption problem by consuming more of a different product. We need to evaluate our own consumptive habits to say, for instance, I have 4 kids. Every year, at the beginning of school, they somehow need a new backpack. I was the same way. You want to fly? Get it. You don't need it. Stop worrying about things that are unimportant. So I'm not going to tell my 11-year-old daughter who is worried about how she's going to fit in that you're focused on the wrong things and start loving people. It doesn't work. But for my wife and I to model, I'm not going to, we don't need that next thing. We can save that money. We can do this with it. We can do that with it. You cannot solve a consumption problem with more consumption on a different country. It doesn't work. You need to spend more and buy less. Buy products that are ethically made, which will cost you more, and just buy less of them. My mom works in a retail store. And she said, well, we can't afford fair trade stuff. It costs so much. If you're paying someone to make it, it's going to cost more. If we're buying things that are like $2 a t-shirt, we cannot be blind to the fact that we are the drivers of slavery. One other thought before I'm done. Go ahead, like 6 minutes. Two other thoughts. American Apparel makes only quote-unquote ethically made products. No slave labor in their supply chain. My favorite quote from their CEO is, no one should have to be exploited so you can have a comfortable shirt. He's a dirtbag, by the way. There's like a record. He's a sexist. This was one of the more tame ones I wanted to throw up for you. If, according to some of American Apparel ads, their socks, which is the only thing you're having, gives you an orgasm, then there is exploitation in the supply chain of getting that t-shirt to you. And that's what one of the ads implies. They're that great. Their models are chosen to look under 18. Why? Because we fetishize youth. Think long and hard before you buy into someone saying, well, it's fair trade. Or this is ethically made, we're good. It is not just one aspect that brings that product to you, which is how it is made, it's also how it is marketed. If they are exploiting women, if they're exploiting men, if they're exploiting children, then there is exploitation in the supply chain. And we have to have the discipline to not invest. Which is, again, going to ruin your day. That thing you really want when you just want coffee and there's only Dunkin' Donuts or Speedway, God bless it. If that's your only option, then maybe, just maybe, go without coffee for that morning. Those decisions are made minute by minute. How am I going to respond to this? I have friends who just flat out say, I will not engage in anything that has connection to slave labor, and they are dirty hippies, and I love them to death. And we marginalize those people and be like, yeah, well, they don't live in the real world. No, they live in the realest world imaginable, because they've said, I don't want someone else to hurt, so I can be comfortable, or happy, or sexually satisfied, or whatever the case might be. So in Michigan, as you're starting to think through where it happens, how it happens, consider the context that you're in. Are you if you have a large company where a lot of international talent is brought in, where they're coming from a different context? Do they have the big drivers of commercial sex, existing adult prostitution or existing adult sex industry, previous sexual abuse, a large runaway and homeless youth population, transit mill, and poverty, and substance abuse, sorry. Are those existing in your population? By the way, as we speak about runaway and homeless youth, understand this. There are counties in Michigan who do not even record that a child is missing. If you want to report that your child has run away in Wayne County, you have to take them to the Office of Incorrigibility to report them as a chronic runaway. That labels that kid as the problem. Runaway and homeless youth are called runaways, not run-tos. They are running away from abuse and neglect the majority of the time. If that is the case, then people who are from or living in Wayne County should be all up in their administrative business about these are our kids. If they are gone from home and they are nobody's kids, then they are our kids. That's the church being the church at that moment. That's what actually, by the way, draws people to the church, if they're just acting in the way that they love people. That's a huge part of this. Understand what your county is doing to engage these issues. It's great to hear that you've got professors from here working with the vice mayor, and you've got police chiefs. That's all wonderful. That's great. But everybody can say that slavery is wrong. And one of the questions that my wife and I are wrestling with right now is the question, are we in love with the idea of changing the world, or are we actually in love with changing the world? We tend to be in love with the idea of changing the world because it is really sexy. But it is far more complicated to actually change it. And you can't deny that if you just look at any of your civil rights heroes, or any of the people in your neighborhood that changed your life. You wrecked theirs for a partner. My grandma will attest. She changed my life. She lived with us forever. Holy cow, today, and her hair looked great earlier than it should. Life gets complicated when you are a change agent. Life does not really get complicated when you talk about change. So, one last thing I want to talk about. How does human trafficking happen in Michigan? It happens when we pass a bill that codifies what we already have. We should have a Safe Harbor Act in Michigan that says children are victims of human trafficking if they are involved in a commercial sex environment. What we have is a bill that says children are presumed to be a victim, just like a criminal is presumed to be innocent if they are in a commercial sex environment. Not good. Understand, I'm an advocate, I'm an activist for this. It will never be good enough until the kids are safe. That is not keeping our kids safe. What normally happens with the young women and young men we work with is that if they are picked up turning a trick, they are referred to the family court because no one wants to charge a kid with prostitution. No. What the new bill says is kids will be, there's a third passing, they will be directed from juvenile court to family court. That was already happening. Now it's just a mandate. And the court can then say, if you abide by these rules, then we'll consider you a victim. Yet to meet a victim that likes to abide by rules, specifically from a judge. Specifically, if that judge is not someone who understands what they want to do. There is no protocol for how a victim will be treated by the court or by DHS in this new law. None. We have created a purgatory. So the bill's passed. Ship sailed. We need to be calling not just DHS, but our legislators and saying there needs to be a survivor-driven, evidence-based protocol in place so judges who have been working with a case for 2 years who get burned out on it, and I'm not judging that, I understand getting burned out on a tough kid, don't just say, I'm done, we're going to punish you. Punishment does not fix the brain trauma and brain development that's going on in the victim. You might get compliance, but you will not get the change you're seeing. What we have is a bill that continues to treat victims as if they are the problem. That is an issue. Am I happy that someone who buys somebody under 16 is now on the sex offender registry? Yes. Why was that ever an issue in the first place? We have a bill that, if this were a bill about arson, we would say, you are an arson victim if you put the bandages on that we tell you to, you put the medicine on that we tell you to, your scars don't freak us out. Even if all of our medical interventions are not informed by medical professionals and they do you harm. If you do all those things, we'll call you a victim. We wouldn't stand by it. We would do it with another sexual assault victim, and we cannot do it to these kids. How is human trafficking, how is coercion used in Michigan regarding human trafficking? Through our courts and through our legislation. There are people that disagree with me on this. Sounds arrogant, don't care. I'm not wrong. I'm just not. I understand needing to protect the general public. I understand needing to walk alongside kids when they make knucklehead mistakes or really tragic mistakes. But let me explain it this way, and this is the last thing I'll say, and it is the most graphic thing I'll say, and I try to avoid the graphic stuff because it doesn't actually. Here's what happens. A young woman we're working with runs away from the shelter, which is common, it's expected. Gets picked up by a pimp from school, taken downtown. She's picked up on a track in Grand Rapids with a John who has beat her senseless. We get a call saying, do you know her menstrual cycle? Yeah. You know, our staff practice. Is it now? No. Ooh. Well, she doesn't want to take a rape kit, so we're thinking about forcing her to. And the reason we hired our therapist is because she is a pit bull, and she said, if you force her to take that rape kit, we're going to have a problem. If she says no, it means no. Like any other sexual assault victim should get in the first place. That young woman was not given all the information when she was going to be brought back to the shelter. She was brought to a different place that she was not expecting to go. And because she had just been raped repeatedly, she was upset and pushed back, got angry, got physical, and got cuffed and is being charged with assault and not giving information about the pimp and the man who raped her. By the way, none of that is against the new law. That's the problem. Of course she's ticked. Of course she's angry. Of course she's going to kick and bite and spit and call you all sorts of things except a child of God. That is her reality. And if we hold that against her in her moment of terror, I get, I want to be kicked and spit and blah, blah, blah. When we're talking about people who have been serially raped, don't expect them to act normal. Our legislation is responding to a fundamentally abnormal situation in a normal way. It doesn't work. It's not square peg in a round hole. It's trying to play football with instructions from a hockey room. It doesn't work. Two completely different things going on. Human trafficking is happening in Michigan because we let it. Bottom line. Wherever it is, we can actually change it. And if you don't believe that, like human trafficking, slavery has been around forever. It is a wicked problem, like poverty and homelessness, that may never go away, but it can go away around you. You can only control what you can control. Understand your community, understand your vulnerabilities, understand how this works both in labor and in sex. My assumption is you already know what to look for and you have the human trafficking hotline. If you don't, accident. It's probably in some of the materials that are here. Ask somebody how you figure that out. The rest of the day, you're going to have opportunities to hear and kind of expand in areas that I am not a pro, how this actually pans out. Whether it's in labor or with migrant workers or with how do we actually talk about this in small communities and task forces. It is incredibly complicated to solve the problem. But it takes your will. If you know what needs to be done, then do it. Make a path, drive forward. If you have any questions, here's some contact information you can get a hold of me. I'd love to talk with you about this. This is a pretty broad overview of how it happens here. It happens here in the same way it happens everywhere else, except we can at least look at a county and say, here's the top 15 counties where sexual exploitation is most likely to happen. How do I support that county? How do I get involved? Here's the counties that have most migrant workers. Here's the counties that have people being brought in from other countries. How do I engage and educate large organizations? You have the skill set. I saw the video you made. So somebody in this room knows how to make stuff and educate people. Some of you have a